In this episode of The Joy of Football with Martin Tyler and me, we look at the time of their lives. Some of the nations in the Euros: England, Scotland, Germany, Netherlands. Martin's letter from the Gantry takes us through his history of commentating on the Euros. My voice of passion is about the hatred of supporters in football. Three of the best: young player, old player, great player. And we've got a new segment called Get a Little Bit Of. Little bit of culture coming into The Joy of Football. Don't forget to go on the Patreon to see all the extra bits and pieces. Now, an announcement. There's going to be a live recording of The Joy of Football. News of that coming up. And one final thing is I've completely forgotten and I don't care. Let's get on with the show. The Joy of Football podcast. With me, Neil Barnett.
And with me, Martin Tyler.
Looks like Xavi! Ready! Aguero!
The Joy of Football. Hello. Episode 12 of The Joy of Football podcast with Martin Tyler, the voice, commentating for the 50th consecutive year he's doing it. And me, Neil Barnett, the spy, who's spent over 30 years being basically the first reporter from within a club. I want to start today with a couple of things. First of all, we're doing the podcast in a couple of weeks live.
We are in John Lewis's store in Oxford Street. I think it's something like a 6 p.m. start.
Thursday, the 27th of June, which is the day after the group stage of the Euros ends and before the knockouts start.
Yeah, it's the first day off, and we'll be reflecting on what's happened. There'll be a lot to talk about, that's for sure. How we get all this equipment to Oxford Street, I'm not quite sure.
But the most important thing is it's in the wine bar in Oxford Street. So you can get tickets. It's by ticket from Eventbrite. Eventbrite. B-R-I-T, Eventbrite. I've never heard of it, but
you do get a bite as well. You get a snack and a glass of wine, I believe.
Yeah. And mine's a red. Okay, so come on down, meet us. We'll have a question and answer session. yeah. Not in my wine. I'm not there. So just again, it's on Thursday, June the 27th, 6:00 at John Lewis, Oxford Street, and you get your tickets from Eventbrite. Okay, the other thing I just want to bring you are a couple of complaints that we've had from Aston Villa supporters over what I said Emiliano Martinez was my number one goalkeeper in the Premier League last season because I didn't rate their centre-backs. And John Battleghazi is his handle on Twitter.
He's taken up a battle with you.
He has. Yeah. He says, on the contrary, Pau Torres has been great for Villa this season, and Ollie Watkins should make any team of the season. He was in Martin's team, Ollie Watkins. He's got more assists and goals from open play than someone like Palmer, who's been great but takes pens. And then Unrivaled Recruitment has messaged FFS. You haven't a clue about Pau Torres and how good he is. Ha ha ha. Clearly do not watch Villa games. So we'll see how good he is in the Euros, boys. Oh, no, we won't, because he didn't get selected for Spain in the Euros. And in fact, in the preliminary squad, he didn't get selected. But 17-year-old Pau Kubasi of Barcelona did, though he didn't make the final squad. So Pau Torres is behind them. So FFS... You're wrong. Right.
Esri Konsa could well do a fantastic job for England. And he's done really well for Villa. And when he's played at right back, he's probably looked like a centre-half playing at right back, but he's done it very well. Done it for the team. And that kind of commitment is typical what Gareth Southgate wants, versatility. Young, first tournament. It's a great chance for him to put Villa even more on the map than that wonderful season which has just finished has done for them.
Concert is better than Torres. Right. Okay.
Sounds like a chant.
Let's move on. And we're going to start this week with Time of Our Lives. Ta-da. And this is where we pick a team, and this is going to be nations from the Euros. We pick a team and we basically talk about when they've given us greatest joy. and for you, greatest commentary. And we're going to start with the two home nations, for those of you watching who live in Great Britain. England.
But I didn't commentate on it, so I'm probably breaking the rules right at the start. 66 it has to be. I did go to one game, the third group game against France, stood behind the goal, and England qualified through that to get them. And Jimmy Greaves got injured, actually, which is a story about the World Cup, if you know your World Cup history. But it was extraordinary. Those who weren't around at the time, if England were to win this tournament, then the joy in the country is just unconfined. The feeling of World Cup 66 and how it reached beyond football, reached the whole population. It was extraordinary. It wasn't a huge media event, strangely enough. A lot of the front pages of the newspapers sort of almost carried it as a bit of a box on the Sunday morning papers after the Saturday result. But it did, and of course it was live on television, which was a rarity in those days. Kenneth Wolstenholme did the commentary for BBC. Hugh Johns, who was an excellent commentator as well, did it for ITV. And it was just, it reached everybody. And much as I would like to pick something since then, and I've been lucky enough, I commentated on the Euro 96 when England played extremely well, the World Cup in 1990 when England got going eventually, and of course more recently under Gareth Southgate, the near misses. And the nearest miss, of course, is what they're trying to put right from the previous Euros. And we're into Euro mode, Neil, aren't we? That's why we're starting with this. But the boys of '66 were just all heroes to me. And now, one by one, we've been losing them. Happily, Sir Geoff is still with us, who scored the only hat-trick for a winning team in a World Cup final. Kylian Mbappe came so close to matching that feat, of course, in Qatar. So, yeah, they're emblazoned all over my house. They're all in my heart. I got to know them all later after they'd achieved this. But, yeah. And when I see Sir Geoff, which occasionally I'm privileged to do, we have a nice chat about football and the issues of the day. And we shake hands. And as he turns to walk away, I go, by the way, you're still my hero. And his reply is two very pertinent words, if you like. But it's very special. So I can't go any further than that.
Yeah, I always, my dad went to the World Cup final. I was at home lying on the floor.
I was too, yeah.
With which was my television stance then. But what I remember of the World Cup most emotionally is Bobby Charlton was still the survivor from Munich. Bobby and Jack Charlton were the brothers, and Jimmy Greaves was the injured absentee who couldn't get right and couldn't get back in the team. And then, of course, that iconic moment where Bobby Moore went up to collect the trophy and wiped his muddied hands on his shirt.
Oh, he wiped it on it was just a sheet hanging over, just protecting the royalty and the good and the great from woodworm or whatever might have been there. He just wiped his hands on that and then went, perfect manners to receive it from.
Absolutely brilliant. And of course, the iconic, they think it's all over. It is now 10.
Amazing. What happened? Fans ran on the pitch, and that was the line. If you don't know it, you're probably not English.
But I'm not going to choose that team because I didn't think it was a particularly entertaining side. And if I look back, the 1970 side was more entertaining with Terry Cooper bombing up one wing and Henry Newton, the Blackburn Everton. Keith Newton.
There was a Henry Newton, to be fair to you.
He was Nottingham Forest.
Yes.
Up the right wing, the fullbacks. But I'm going to go. There were 86 when Lineker and Beardsley became a two. That became very entertaining. 90 when after the first game England went to a back three with Mark Wright playing the sweeper role and with Gaza. That was entertaining. But I'm going to go for 96 because I just thought that Sheringham and Shearer with Gascoigne behind them. I thought, and we scored goals. We scored goals, as you said, 4 against the Netherlands, and we scored goals. David Seaman had his best tournament. I thought that was the most entertaining team. Mostly it had the shackles off, which England don't normally have.
But like 66, it was in England.
Yeah. True. Scotland.
Well, it was tricky because the one the Scots always talk about is 1967, when England, of course, hadn't lost since the World Cup final until they faced Scotland at Wembley in, what we say, I think it was about 11 games, something like that. Anyway, so Scotland won 3-2, proclaimed themselves as the unofficial world champions, but actually doesn't stand a lot of forensic research this, because England only had 8 fit players for much of the game. Jack Charlton was injured very early on. Martin Peters, a midfield player, attacking midfield player, had to go and play centre half. And probably Scotland should have won by more, but it was the victory. Alf Ramsey says something about, I hope they understand we're not making excuses, but we did really only have 8 players. And praised the Scots for winning at Wembley and ending England's undefeated run. But that's they throw that out. But I think in '63 they won 2-1 at Wembley, and there's a guy, Jim Baxter, who I think played in both these games, who was one of the great entertainers, almost too much an entertainer to be a methodical footballer. But
I'd enjoyed a drink in the days when footballers enjoyed a drink.
Everybody enjoyed a drink, I think, and then probably until people started going abroad and finding that not all the other countries drank the same way anyway. And they had, on that occasion, Scotland had the injury problems. Eric Caldo had his leg broken.
Left back.
Yeah, and so they played with 10. This is 63, no subs. 67 was beginning to come towards subs. They had, I think England had a sub goalkeeper. It might have even been your friend Peter Bonetti. And they beat England well with playing with 10 men. And so I think that's. I would like to throw in, and somebody you know well, I don't know quite as well, but I do know, Steve Clarke's doing a fantastic job with the Scotland of today. And we're speaking a couple of days before their opening game. They kick off Euros, as they did kick off, if I remember rightly, the World Cup in '98 in France. They played Brazil. So I think he's done remarkably well. Scottish football isn't what it was. Back in the 60s, there were Scots playing all over the top clubs in England. In fact, if I used to go and watch training, I probably didn't in the 60s because I didn't start commentating until the early 70s. But England played Scotland on the morning within the same squad. Like the last warm-up game, the last bit of training was England v Scotland, often in the car park. And truthfully, there were players who missed out on the Saturday game because they were kicked by one of their colleagues, England v Scotland, on the morning before. So I do think, Steve's working not exactly with one hand tied behind his back, but with lesser resources and with less players playing at the very top level. So I'm a big fan of his, and I hope he really does well.
Steve Clarke is a doleful, miserable Scot, and he always says that when he became the assistant to Kenny Dalglish at Liverpool, the reason that Kenny hired him and asked him to be his coach was because Clarkey would make Kenny Dalglish look like a happy guy in comparison. It was the only reason. Yeah. But I'm going to say that my joy of Scotland is zilch, because they've just always underperformed. They've had, if you go back to the days of Jimmy Johnson and Dennis Law and all those fabulous players they had in the 60s, and even if you go forward to the 80s when Alan Hansen was in his prime as one of the greatest defenders in the world, winning European Cup after European Cup. And there were so many Liverpool players who were Scottish at that time, but they never, ever did it for Scotland as a group. And, they'd go off to World Cups and have their celebrations before they went, had a diabolical World Cup, lose the final game, but Archie Gemmill would get the goal of a lifetime.
1978.
And everybody would say, oh, it's the Scots. It never happened as a group. So it's going to happen this year, I hope. I'm convinced that Steve Clarke's going to get them out of the group. I'm convinced.
But they did finish bottom of the last Euro group. They qualified, but they did hold England, and they drew 0-0 at Wembley. And I can remember other performances when they'd lost 2-0 at home. This was, I think, a European Championship qualifying round, and they came to Wembley 2-0 down and won. Don Hutchinson scored, but they didn't win by a margin to get through. That was in the late 1990s, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, they
played with real togetherness, and they play with their hearts as well as that. Maybe too much with their hearts, I don't know. But it's a small country. You've been banging on about small countries.
Yeah, they beat Spain
podcasts.
in the qualifiers.
Yeah.
Well, they deserve to be. They're going to do it. It'll be this year.
Clarky will smile.
They're going to be. No, he won't. It's against his religion. They're my team. They're the team I'm going to support in the Euros this year. I never support England. They just annoy me. Germany.
Well, there's been so much German success. There's a wonderful film called The Miracle of Bern. I really counsel you to see it. And we're going to talk films a bit later on, which was, I think, made by a German company. That was the '54 World Cup. It's a lovely, lovely story where they came back from 2-0 down to beat the great Hungarian side in Switzerland and win the World Cup in 1954. So that was a great achievement. But the achievement really was winning the World Cup in Brazil in 2014, the first.
God, what an awful World Cup that was.
Well,
the Netherlands were the team in that World Cup. Germany were just.
I just remind my colleague here that we are talking about the joy of football, and I am telling you that the joy that Germany got from that World Cup was considerable. And they left. I think I'm right. This is off the top of my head. They built a training camp, which they left for the locals after the finish, and they would have done that if they'd gone out of the group stage. But I thought it was an amazing achievement. We sort of grew up with when it's in the Americas, then the South American teams win, and when it's in Europe, the European teams win. Obviously, Brazil gave the light to that, and then of course Spain won in South Africa, and then it wasn't just the Americas, and that was 4 years before this triumph. I thought they did amazingly well to do that that far away from home, and in a tournament where obviously there was a lot of backing for the host nation. So good on them. And Super Mario Götze. And they even had the player, we didn't know, commentating on the final, one of the players got injured in the warm-up, and the internet went down. So until we saw him on the field, we didn't realise that a change had been made. I think it was Kramer who was brought into the team at the last minute, very much the last minute. So they had that to deal with as well. But worthy world champions, and that's a bit of history for me.
Assist by Andre Schürrle of Chelsea for that Götze goal.
So sure.
I'm going to go to the team that won the World Cup in 1974 in their own country, for Germany, because it was just one of those reinventions of football, wasn't it? Where Franz Beckenbauer had been one of the most gifted midfielders in the world, but they went three at the back and he went as a sweeper, and he became he ran the game from behind the rest of the team, and it worked. And he used to break forward, and they beat a very good Netherlands in the final, and they were 10 men plus Gerd Müller up front, who did nothing. He wasn't even fast. He couldn't run. He was squat. He was a bit tubby. Everything was wrong with him, and he was the best goal scorer in the world. And he was the best goal scorer in the world for a long, long time.
He was.
And he needed half a chance, and it was a goal, and he got the winning goal in the World Cup final, because that's who he was. And Beckenbauer ran the game because that's who he was, and they called him the Kaiser. Well,
you remember we've talked about '66, that he couldn't run the game for Germany because Bobby Charlton, he was deputed to Bobby Charlton, who didn't have much of a look in the final. Obviously, it was a great compliment to Bobby that they did this, and they took Beckenbauer out of by giving him that job. So, he's been around a long time, and I'm delighted to read just a couple of days ago that I think the opening ceremony is going to pay tribute to the late Franz Beckenbauer, who left us not that long ago, and gave so much as a player, and of course went on to manage a World Cup winning team as well. So, he's in the icons. It's an overused word, but he is an icon.
And finally, the Netherlands.
Well, you mentioned about them losing the final in '74 in Germany, to Germany, West Germany, as it was then. And then 4 years later, with another brilliant team, some overlap, but not Johan Cruyff, who was the star in '74. They got to the final again, and again played against the host nation, Argentina. Took it to extra time, hit the post in extra time, but lost in the end by 3-1. So, and they've missed out, of course, in the World Cup final since then. So they won in 1988 the Euros. So I have to pick that team. In my letter, which is coming up, there's a story in there that I'll save for the letter. But I think that was a great generation of players. They had the generation after the 70s, and they've produced. Again, we talk about small nations. They produce a ridiculous number of players, and that team. And we'll see. Interesting to see how competitive they are this time around, because those influences right back from the 70s are all passed through, handed down.
Just carrying on.
Yeah.
1998, Gus Hiddink was managing them, and they were easily the most entertaining team in '98, and they lost in the semi-finals to Brazil on penalties. I mean, it was that close, and they had a fantastic team in '98.
Well, I think it puts into perspective what England have done, because England have had some fantastic teams as well, and they've fallen by the wayside in these fine margin games, you know. I mean, you mentioned the 1970 2-0 up against West Germany. Maybe you could say that was careless to lose that, but there were issues. The goalkeeper, the great Gordon Banks, was ill and couldn't play, and that disrupted the defensive side of the game.
Centre half couldn't defend.
Well, but penalty losses as well, which we know we don't have to go through again. So they're probably, you know, they could be put in the same envelope.
But you go on then to the Arjen Robben, Van Persie team, and the little number 10 from Inter Milan, Real Madrid,
Wesley Sneijder.
What a player he was, and
he was at the Champions League final. I saw him working presumably
so
for Dutch television.
I mean, they have been. I think they are very definitely in there as one of the great entertainers.
Yeah.
But I'm going to go for that '88 side. Because Rijkaard, Gullit, Van Basten, I mean, you just can't. It was
There's more to come on that, Neil.
Right.
So
Okay.
we'll save that.
We will move on.
Yes.
So enjoy every game. We will move, and I mean every game. If you don't watch every game, you're not a real person. Letter.
I'm revving up for the letter.
Letter from the Gantry by Martin Tyler,
which is Euro related.
Letter from the Gantry.
Well, let's start in 1976. Only 4 nations in the finals, staged in the old Yugoslavia. And my main job was behind the scenes, editing the matches for ITV's highlight show later each evening. The first semi-final was between the then Czechoslovakia and the 1974 World Cup losing finalists, the Netherlands. In the bowels of the London studios, I had already completed my edit of the first half, and was hurried back into business when the game went to extra time. The 90 minutes had finished 1-1, a goal and then an own goal from the then Czech captain Anton Ondruš. Both teams were also down to 10 men, both dismissals by a high-profile referee of the time, Clive Thomas of Wales. I was then made aware of a technical problem. Brian Moore was ITV's main commentator, but his sound line from the stadium in Zagreb had only been booked for 90 minutes, and in those days you could not extend such facilities at such short notice. An emergency substitute had to be found back in London. I got the tap on the shoulder. It was getting on for 11 p.m, and I was the only person in the building who had any commentary experience at all. In my case, a dozen or so matches for the old Southern Television. As it was a highlights programme, the 30 minutes of actual extra time was cut down to not much more than 10 minutes. But those highlights were played out on the air. My voice was added live. There was a lot of action to cram in. 2 Czech goals to knock out the famous Dutch, who had a second player sent packing by referee Thomas. For me, it was a big deal. I thought a big break. But here we are, 48 years later, and I still haven't come across anyone who heard it. Czechoslovakia, the underdogs, also won the final, that Panenka penalty, which does get plenty of mention still. My main memory of Euro 1980 in Italy is of giving co-commentator Ron Atkinson, soon to be the Manchester United manager, pronunciation lessons, particularly for the Greece squad, but only by the pool and not before 5 p.m. Big Ron had his priorities. He was lots of fun, as was the Belgium team, which lost to West Germany in the final. 1984 was France in France, 9 goals in 5 games from the great Michel Platini, including back-to-back hat-tricks. I ran out of superlatives by the end. 1988, like now in Germany. I drove round the autobahns from game to game to the sound of Prefab Sprout's King of Rock and Roll. The kings of the competition were the Netherlands, who were so thrilled at beating West Germany in their semi-final that they didn't make a fuss when Hans van Breukelen, their Nottingham Forest goalkeeper, insisted that I came straight into the victorious dressing room as the players left the field. Gullit, Van Basten, Koeman and company must have wondered, what the heck? It was a rare and privileged snapshot of a great celebration from great players. On to 1992 in Sweden. England were there, a last hurrah for Gary Lineker, but the story was Denmark, a fairy story. The Danes had been called back from their holidays to make up the numbers. The breakup of Yugoslavia had seen them disqualified. Denmark became European champions, but it was bittersweet. Kim Vilfort spent time between games with his 7-year-old daughter, who was critically ill with leukemia. His family insisted that Kim kept playing. In the 2-0 win in the final against the now unified Germany, he scored the second goal to clinch the triumph. All of us who knew the backstory had tears in our eyes. Euro 1996, 16 nations for the first time, including the host England. I've covered over 350 England games, and few, if any, better the 4-1 demolition of the Dutch. There was also that Gascoigne goal and Seaman penalty save against Scotland. Stuart Pearce's proud penalty in the shootout with Spain. Gareth Southgate's semi-final heartbreak from the spot. Germany went on to win the trophy via the recently introduced golden goal rule, which also applied 4 years later, when France overcame Italy in Brussels. I had a reporter's job that year and no accreditation, so post-match I had to ask the players to step outside the stadium. The likes of Paolo Maldini, Muzzy Izzet and Frank Leboeuf helped me out big time. Kindness that I would never forget. In 2004, Wayne Rooney was rampant, but in the end, Greece was the word, defeating the host Portugal with very disciplined defending and a breakaway goal. Euro 2008 was split between Austria and Switzerland. The football was good, and it was the start of a golden era for the winners, Spain. But the views on the regular train journeys between the two countries were even better. 2012 was also split between Poland and Ukraine. England played 3 successive group games in Donetsk, but were then knocked out by Italy, that penalty curse again, in Kiev, as we called it then. Italy reached the final, but were no match for the defending champions Spain, who since their previous Euro triumph had also won the 2010 World Cup. In 2016, Alan Smith and I were working for UEFA. We were staying in an official hotel with our French crew. Not the best place to be when the news came through of Brexit. Our stock within the group tumbled dramatically. France also suffered football-wise. Portugal had failed in the final as host 12 years earlier. Now they put the same hex on the French, despite losing Cristiano Ronaldo after some 20 minutes. Eder, a one-time Swansea City striker with a very poor international scoring record, came on to grab the winner. Portugal had survived a testing semi-final against Wales, who did the home nations proud, knocking out Belgium along the way. England lost to Iceland. Much more embarrassing within a tournament than in the week before one starts, as has just happened. 2020 was, of course, COVID restricted and actually held in 2021 and staged all over the continent. Alan and I were together again, but based at Wembley, so no awkward political questions this time. I have spoken before on this podcast of crossing paths with Luke Shaw when he was playing in a primary school match. He was already tipped for the top. I was, inwardly, very proud when he gave England that early lead in the final of the European Championship. It could have been, maybe should have been, the winner against Italy at Wembley. Well, fitness permitting, he's got another crack at it, coming right up.
2 thoughts. 1996. I don't go to England games or to international games, really. 1996, I was on holiday with the family in Spain when England played Spain. Watched it in a bar, and outdoors glorious. And all I can remember is the Spanish commentator. And every time that the England winger got the ball, he went, McManaman! Steve McManaman! And I just have this clear memory
He
of
must
that.
have known that he was going to join Real Madrid.
Yeah,
then.
and when it went to penalty shootout, my table, particularly me and my son, was celebrating David Seaman and the penalty takers, and the other people in the bar got a little bit irate and surrounded us, and it just got like nastier than normal.
So he has supported England at some point.
And my other thought is just with the final in 2021, when Luke Shaw scored, if you as a Chelsea supporter, Chelsea previously worker like me, looked across the pitch.
You're talking about you, not me.
Yeah, across the pitch at Italy and saw Jorginho in the Italy lineup and know that he can't run and know that he's physically weak. You don't back off and defend your box. You push on and press hard. He always had problems against people pressing hard. He ran games when he was given any space whatsoever because he had the quickest mind. And I just feel Gareth got that one so wrong. And this is the tournament where he's got to make up for that. And
that is the furthest England have ever got in the
yeah,
European
but he
Championship.
got that moment. He must look back on that and think, why didn't we crowd Jorginho out instead of letting Italy right back in the game? And Jorginho's still there now. So if anyone who faces Italy, just press him. He'll fall over. Martin's letter from the Gantry. We're going to go straight on from here to Voice of Passion.
Voice of Passion.
And of course, Martin will give us the voice of reason afterwards. My voice of passion this week, my passionate feeling this week. Back in the days of Roman Abramovich running Chelsea, he started a No to Hate campaign. And the No to Hate campaign was really about, it was really a push against anti-Semitism, which was going on in football quite openly at the time. Now, Chelsea supporters have got to the point where when the team runs out, they chant, "We hate Tottenham," which is just pathetic to even bring that club into the theme, if you like, of a game starting. It's just, to me, completely insane. But the No to Hate campaign is the only thing that the current ownership has kept from the last ownership. And yet that isn't dealt with. It's still the liquidator and "We hate Tottenham." Now the West Midlands police stopped Wolverhampton Wanderers using the liquidator because they had a chant which was two other words and then West Brom in the liquidator to the full claps. But I want to take this into international football. And I'm just sick to death of the hatred in support of teams and nations for other teams and nations or other teams in club football, as if that makes you out to be a better supporter. I'm a more passionate supporter because I hate this team and that team. It's pathetic. It's impotent. It's ignorant. It's unworthy. It's just feeble. And football can be ruined by supporters who hate for other people.
There's no disagreement from this microphone. I promise you what you said.
The booing of the national anthem.
I share your
just
passion.
Pathetic.
The word is supporters. That's what you are. You're supporters. You support your team. That's why we all fell in love with football. We found a team that absolutely enchanted us, and through good times and bad, we go and watch them play. And I think that's been forgotten. And if it's taking some sort of frustration out on the opposition, it's not necessary. Back your team, and the teams that do, we were talking before we started the podcast about rivalries. You mentioned Spurs and Chelsea, but my recent memory was of the Spurs-Arsenal game in the best stadium in the world, the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, and the first game that they played against the Arsenal when fans were allowed back in after COVID, and the noise level was incredible. I could hardly do much more than say the names of the players to think I could just about hear Gary Neville, who was alongside me, and it was proper backing for their team, and I think they won the game. So listen, it's a world in which there is hatred that we're not qualified to talk about, really not qualified to talk about. So if that is taken into a letting off steam scenario, it might be understandable, but I don't think it's excusable. And that would be my message. Live up to the term, live up to the word, supporter. You are a supporter, support.
It does. I'm going to sound really, really righteous and old here. It doesn't help when people snort coke and then go to a game and try and get in without tickets and try and just obliterate the enjoyment of everybody else. And you're not enjoying the game, you're enjoying yourselves. It's a complete and utter feeble masturbation. It's just awful. And supporters are as much in danger, so-called supporters are as much in danger through hatred of ruining the game as owners who are in it for profit or in it for sports washing. There you go.
Well, behaviour is something that football's had to live with since the bad behaviour of the 80s. Everybody who's close to the game knows that security is still in place, and there are risks, different risks, as you've just highlighted, the risks that are difficult to detect. But the game, as I've said several times in these shows, the game has never been better. The level of play has never been better. The feel-good factor around it. And sometimes, you just wonder how much longer it can go on for, or what will stop it. And there's no doubt that crowd misbehaviour will stop it. We're talking Euros today, and what happened at Wembley in 2021 was disgraceful. And we did mention it, I think, in the last podcast, I was really worried when we found out the 3 fans or 4 fans that ran on was for a bet to try and win some money or something, not with any belief that they were actually making those dark clouds get even darker from the past. And they've been, I think, properly punished. I think the circumstances have been understood, but it's no excuse. They could have run them with knives. So we cannot have that. They take the joy from it. That's the title of our podcast. And make sure you realise. I always said about players over the years, I'll be saying with my slippers in front of the fire, if I ever get to that stage, I'll be saying, I saw him play. I saw him score a great goal. I saw her play and score a wonderful goal. And those things that you should take away as treasured moments from going to football. That's what it should be about. And we are being self-righteous here, I suppose, and not perhaps understanding the feelings of the fans. And they could come back and say, you don't know what it's like out there. When you
do know. It doesn't have to be hatred.
Who starts it? That's the problem. Do you go there ready to defend yourself? Is that the reason for going? Do you enjoy that sense of confrontation before the game, outside the ground? It's never ever. This is a story I've never told before, but I once went to a Woking game in the East End of London, and I swore as a 13 or 14-year-old at a opposing player, and a guy came up to me and he said, "If ever you do that again, I'll pull your tongue out." Imagine if that would happen in my life. But that I never forgot that, and I'm not ashamed to tell it, because it was a life-changing moment. But it just put into perspective what I was there for. I was there to support my team, not insult his team. And that's the way I think it should be. Yes, we're probably idealistic in suggesting this, but we do both believe it.
Yeah, and also, I mean, in the age of social media, violence is a way of achieving celebrity, whether it's violence of tongue or violence of action, is a way of achieving celebrity, which is what a lot of people, all they want to do. And I just want to go back to the values of, I'm a born in the 50s, child of the 60s. That hippie period, peace and love, all that. You know what? I believe in all that, and it's a much healthier, vibrant way of living than what we have. And as a Chelsea man, I've never hated Tottenham. I've never hated Arsenal. No. Never hated Liverpool or Manchester United.
I've never hated Aldershot because when I always go to Woking, Aldershot were in the Football League and Woking could never play them unless they drew them in an FA Cup, which I don't think they ever did until probably the 1990s. And yet it all comes round every time Woking play. And I was coach there when we played them a good few times. And I never felt it because when Woking weren't playing, I went to Aldershot, not to support them, but to watch them, watch better football. Yeah. That was it. And I treasure that. They've got great memories of that. And they've now, as a Woking fan, saying this in front of a microphone, I'll probably get ridiculed by my own club for it. But
I just need to say that being a child of the 60s, I do understand it because I bloody hate Leeds. Okay.
Well, you give me a clue to say that Françoise Hardy passed away, the French beauty singer, chanteuse. I was so in love with her. So in love. I
was a Brigitte Bardot
She
fella.
was a couple of years older than me, and she was the most desirable woman that I'd ever seen at that time.
Didn't she used to do Jukebox Jury? She had one UK hit, but she used to do Jukebox Jury. Well, that's lovely. Right, but okay, let's move on. Let's move on.
Rest in peace, beautiful one.
It is time for 3 of the best.
And he makes them pay.
Yes, thank you.
3 of the best. He's made them pay, and that completes a wonderful hat-trick.
Young player, old player, young player.
Yes. Well, we are sort of Euros-ish, aren't we? Lamine Yamal, 16 years. 16. He's in the Spain squad. He'll be 17.
He's going to play.
Yeah, he probably is going to play. He's played 7 or 8 times already and scored a couple of goals, already writing history. He'll be the youngest player ever to take part in the finals of the European Championship. He's 17 on the 13th of July, which is the day before the final. You can imagine he might have to restrain his birthday celebrations if they do get to the final. But I've seen him play for Barcelona. He's a left-footed, inverted winger. There are plenty of them about, but not many at this stage of their lives.
They used to have a small left-footed inverted winger at Barcelona who made quite an impact on the game.
He's a pretty good example for him to follow, isn't it? He's just leaps off the page, really, when we're talking about the Euros. And none of us are quite sure quite how Spain are going to compete in this, but they've got history in the tournament, as I've just outlined.
Don't fancy him.
Pau Torres
isn't in the squad. They got a chance. Pal, if I ever get to meet you, I'm sure I'll love you and your family.
Yes. Wow, Pau. So there's my young.
Okay. I've got loads of young players.
You always do.
Yeah. What I've done, I've gone back to the Golden Boy winner, this award that's given out in Europe every year, to see. Really, what interests me is just, I keep saying it's so hard when you're young to get to that next level, and everyone assumes that you will. So I've gone back to 2011 to see how many of the young boy winners are involved in the Euros this time round. Just to give you an example of why I didn't go back to 2010, the winner in 2010 was Mario Balotelli, who shone in the 2012 finals, and I think that was probably his only international tournament in the end. But he is a bit old now, so he probably even if he'd had a longer lasting international career,
I don't asterisk against him, haven't you?
So I'm starting in 2011, and the Golden Boy winners were 2011, and none of these are in the tournament that I'm going to give you now. 2011, Mario Götze scored the World Cup winner in 2014, but has really struggled since 2014.
Injury hit.
Yeah.
But struggled.
2012, Isco, the Spanish player who never went to Real Madrid, never quite fulfilled his potential there.
Fair point.
And has struggled since. 2013, Paul Pogba. Whatever happened to Paul Pogba?
Yeah, well, that's a story for at least 6 podcasts on its own.
2014, Raheem Sterling. He's not made it this time round. In fact, he hasn't played for England since the World Cup. No. 2015, Anthony Martial. goodness me. In fact, we could just do a list of Manchester United players who haven't really fulfilled their potential. 2017, the first one to make it, Kylian Mbappe, who will, of course, captain France. 2018, Matthijs de Ligt, the Dutch centre-half. He'll be in the Netherlands squad. 2019, João Felix, or João Felix, as he told us. Well,
that's what it is.
He wants to be named. He's in the Portugal squad. 2020, Erling Haaland hasn't qualified. In fact, Norway haven't qualified since he's been in the team and Odegaard's been in the team for an international tournament. They missed out on the World Cup as well. 2021, Pedri, who's just made it fitness-wise, and I think will be one of the stars of the tournament.
Was certainly one of the stars of the last one.
Yeah.
2022,
his teammate Gavi, who hasn't made it because of injury.
Injured, yeah.
And 2023, Jude Bellingham, who will, of course, be a big part of England's campaign. But it's a remarkable number of people who haven't made it. And the reason is it's hard to be a really good player.
Also, I find these individual awards not in keeping with the spirit of why you play football or why you watch football. It's about the team. You support a team. I know there is now a tendency to support an individual, particularly if you're an expat and you've got a player. We think of Son's own personal fan club over here. I'm sure many South Koreans living in London.
And as you know, when you go to a Tottenham game, there are almost more South Korean journalists and broadcasters there than there are British.
But I get that, and I think that is fair enough. But I do think the individual awards. I was told once, I think by Didi Hamann, that when he came to England, he was amazed these Man of the Match awards happened all the time, or Player of the Game awards, we now call them. But they didn't happen in Germany when he was playing. So it was about the team. I think we win as a team, lose as a team. Somebody goes, and some of the choices are iffy, I think, because they are based on personal preference rather than what they've been seen. And if sponsors choose it, maybe they haven't quite seen what. I remember watching an NASL game in Tampa, in Florida, in the early 1980s.
North American Soccer League.
Yeah. Frank Worthington was playing for Tampa, I guess. He was brilliant, but he didn't do anything like that. Really, you have to know the game. And to be fair, they know the game in the States now, but they didn't then. And a centre half who could head it 50 yards got man of the match. And Frank, I don't know, I never discussed it with him. I saw him afterwards, but I just think it's praise the team and leave one or two player of the season. Yeah, you get that. But not every game, and not so many individual awards that there's hardly time at the end of the season to have all the gatherings for to give out the awards. And Phil Foden couldn't come to the Football of the Year dinner with the journalists because he was 3 days away from playing to win the Premier League. So it's not always, and that goes back. I go back to my old friend Andy Gray, who was young player and player for the PFA. In 1977, I think, and he couldn't come because he had a game the next day and the manager wouldn't let him go. So praise teams of the season. I think teams that have made great leaps like Aston Villa, that's where the awards should go, and they should be delivered collectively at the last game or whatever, rather than dragging people into ceremonials where there's usually a bit of an excuse to have a night out, really.
Don't need an excuse to have a night out. Old player.
Well, he's not very old, but I like to bring into the podcast what happens to me between the last one, and for circumstances I don't need to bore you with, I saw 34-year-old Tom Cleverley yesterday, actually, and he's now gone from interim head coach at Watford, for whom he played with distinction, and to be the head coach. Now, that's not a job that carries a very long-lasting tag with it, but he won, I think he only lost one of his 7 games as interim coach. He certainly deserves the chance. He had to retire a year ago from playing. He still had plenty of life left in his legs. He looked in great shape, by the way. And I just want to take this opportunity to wish him well. We've talked in earlier podcasts about English managers getting a chance in the Premier League, and that you might have to take a team up to do it. Well, he'll have a chance to do that with Watford, played for England. And I do have a bit of a personal connection with him because his great uncle played for Woking. Reg Stratton, who played in the team that won the Amateur Cup in front of 71,000 at Wembley, which I've mentioned before, in 1958, and scored. And I used to tease Tom. I said, Great Uncle Reg only played once at Wembley and scored, and you keep playing at Wembley for England, so you've got a bit of family tradition to keep up with him there. So I was really pleased to see him and what he represents as well. So good luck to him.
And there was someone else who, as a young player at Manchester United, looked as though he was going to be an absolute world superstar, but the injuries always interrupt his career, and it is just so hard to become the absolute top of the team.
He's got bags. I mean, I said, have you had a holiday? Obviously, we're talking the middle of June, and I've been away for a few days, but he obviously wants to be on site, on his mettle to get the team together that he wants. It wasn't the biggest budget when I asked him about that, but he knows the game, he knows people in the game, so I'll just keep an eye out for him because I think he's a great bloke and I want him to do well. Yeah.
Lovely. My old player is Pascal Gross. Correct pronunciation? Gross.
I think so, not Gross, that's for sure.
Gross. Now,
like Kroos, Tony Kroos, Pascal
because
Gross.
his spelling.
Is double O. Oh, he's got a umlaut and he's got a German S at the end, isn't he? The double S rather.
Yeah, it's like that. It's like that obese bee with a belly hanging over the line at the bottom. That letter and
unsung hero.
Yeah, I mean he won his first cap at the age of 32. The day following the opening game, Germany-Scotland, is his 33rd birthday, or if you're watching this next week, was his 33rd birthday. And he joined Brighton at the age of, I think, 26. You know, Brighton are one of those clubs that get a lot of publicity for being clever recruiters of players, and they buy young and sell hard. Cucurella, McAllister, Caicedo, so many people. But they also buy old. They don't just buy young. They signed Danny Welbeck, they signed James Milner, and they signed Pascal Gross from Ingolstadt after they'd been relegated, and he'd been their best player at the age of 26. He's been there since 2016, 2017. And if you see Brighton, and I've seen them quite a lot down the last few years, he is such a good player. He rarely gives the ball away. He's a attacking midfielder. I've seen him play right back. I've seen him play left back, and he's never let himself or the team down. He's a bit miserable on the pitch. He's a bit miserable off it sometimes with his interviews. Very serious. But what a personality. What a player. And what a good goal scorer. Scorer of big goals and critical in getting them into Europe. Critical with their run to the quarterfinals in Europe. And suddenly, in the veteran stage of his career, a German international. And I think he'll start.
Yes, he probably will. I mean, it is a great fairy story, isn't it? Really, because he wasn't. I remember asking some of my German journalist friends, saying, "Why hasn't he been in the team?" Oh, well, nobody knows too much about him. He's been at Brighton for a little while. Well, somebody's come over and done some good scouting. Because you're right, he can create, he can score, he takes a penalty, and he scores in big games as well, which I think is always a great quality. So yeah, good choice, Neil.
Player.
Well, this is going to be seen very obvious, but I'm going to go for Jude Bellingham. We are on the cusp of. Don't forget, he's played in a World Cup. He scored in a World Cup, and it's not as though he's a tournament novice, but he's still very young. But I don't think he's ever gone into so far in his fledgling career with so much expectation on his shoulders. But I do, in watching him play, watching him be interviewed, I do understand why there will be advertising campaigns for the commercial partners who want to use his image and use his personality as their main suit. You know, I've just said about it's not about individuals, but when you are an individual in a team, you've got to have those qualities that make you. The team comes first, but what you do as an individual, of course, is pretty close behind. And he does seem to have pretty much everything. Maybe not quite a defined position, because he can be good in so many different positions, but I think his background is essential, and it's been really good. You know, I think you look at some players, Bukayo Saka's another one in the England squad, who clearly have benefited from being brought up the right way, and many footballers are like that. But with Jude, with the expectation on him, and Bukayo as well, I think they're called upon to show that sort of personal strength as well as their football strength. So I hope he has a great tournament. If he does, there's a very good chance that England might end this drought, and Gareth Southgate might even round off his England career. I think if he wins it, though, there'll be a great weight of opinion from the nation to carry on, because he's brought a lot of other qualities. People say he hasn't brought the silverware home yet, but some near misses, but he's restored the love of the public into the England team.
That's true.
And his general behaviour with some pretty difficult issues to deal with beyond your average football manager. It's almost a political appointment to be manager of England, and he's handled all that word perfect. So, but Jude, I look at him, I think if you made an identikit footballer, if you could clone all the parts that make you something that would be sort of super player, he's pretty close to that.
I just want to say, you brought up Saka with Luke Shaw struggling for fitness. Everyone's saying, oh, Kieran Trippier will play left back and Joe Gomez can play left back. Saka can play left back. Yeah, he hasn't for 18 months. He's left-footed. He will create. He will construct. Oh, it's his international footballer. Put Saka at left back, and let's really go for it. Not just someone who will get
Palmer in the team, don't you?
Well, it might not get Cole Palmer. It might get Anthony Gordon in. It might get.
Yeah.
But I put Cole Palmer in, obviously. But let's Saka.
But it's like Declan Rice can play centre back, and no one's talked about that shortage of centre backs. Declan Rice would be as good a centre back as anybody in that squad, but because he has a main role elsewhere, and that's what probably Gareth would say. Bukayo Saka is my first choice wide right.
Fair enough.
They are that versatility in game. If something happens to Kieran Trippier, then I would imagine that's pretty high on the list of options, you know. But Luke's going to be fit, I believe, after the first game.
I've got two players this week, Federico Chiesa and Kylian Mbappe. And you mentioned earlier on about the rather strange choices of man of the match. What about choices of man of the tournament? Italy won the Euros, and they gave the player of the tournament to Donnarumma because he'd won a load of penalty shootouts. But he hardly made any great penalty saves. He's not a top goalkeeper. He's never been a top goalkeeper. I'm sorry, but he hasn't got good hands. He doesn't dominate his penalty area. He's a beast on the line, and he makes great saves of shots. He doesn't hold them, ever.
He's getting what will be known in this podcast as the Pau Torres treatment.
Yeah, and he makes mistakes, including mistakes that have seen Italy not qualify for the World Cup. So the player of the tournament in 2021 was Federico Chiesa, who came into the Italian team and just changed them from chuggers to creative, penetrating, goal-scoring country. And Chiesa should have won that by quite a margin. I mean, it went to a penalty shootout. I would like to think that if England had won it, it would have gone to an England player who would have been, for me, either Luke Shaw or Raheem Sterling, who was a Manchester City player at the time. So,
Luke's just a boyhood Chelsea fan.
Yeah, so
that's why he got a mention.
But one of those two should have won it. If Italy won it, it had to be Chiesa. I mean, he was terrific. And then I come to the World Cup in 2022, and it went to Lionel Messi almost because it seemed to be a marketing thing. Yeah, he had a good tournament. He was still just a good player. But how can it go to Lionel Messi of... Well, no, that was the World Player of the Year of PSG and Inter Miami. But even in the tournament, Mbappe was the top scorer. Mbappe got a hat-trick in the final. Mbappe carried France on his shoulders, for me, much more than Messi carried Argentina on his shoulders. Because, by the way, Alvarez up front was absolutely magnificent for them. And that midfield was terrific. Di Maria had a great tournament.
McAllister got in the team like Alvarez, didn't they? They weren't in the team to start with, didn't they? But I take a slight issue with you because I was there, and the Messi factor was extraordinary. It wasn't because he wasn't supposed to have any great impact in the tournament. He's too old, and Argentina was, say, Di Maria and one or two other players of past vintage. It wasn't going to happen. But I think you're probably right saying Mbappe dragged France into the final, but I think Messi did it in his own way. I mean, it was just extraordinary. Moments we're talking about now, not about football matches. We're not even, perhaps we're talking about man of the moments of the World Cup.
Oh, I'll give you that. Yeah.
But those moments were just absolutely gobsmacking. As a commentator, you go, Messi scored again.
But Mbappe got the first.
He was standing on the halfway line with his hands on his hips and looking though like he'd rather be a ball boy than a player. And then something astonishing happened. So it was a bit of a written in the stars, I think.
It was a bit of a written in the marketing. Mbappe was the best player. Right, that's that. Moving on, we've got a new segment. Instead of stoppage time, we're going to finish this one, which is called Get a Little Bit Of. So, Get a Little Bit Of gives us a chance to maybe go into slightly different culture from the joy of football, but it's all related. Martin.
Yeah, I wanted to pass on some enjoyment of another sport, swimming actually. Young Woman and the Sea is a movie I saw recently. It's about the first woman to swim the English Channel, and they're back in the 1920s when issues around women participating in anything, including politics, were very different from what they are today. And I don't want to be a spoiler about the film, but obviously it wasn't so straightforward, but it was a massive achievement. Trudy Edley was the American woman who did it, faster than any man had ever done it, as it turned out. And she lived till she, as a real life story, she lived till she was 98, so swimming is definitely good for you. But it just was a nice, it was feel good. It was a lump in the throat. Great and wonderful achievement, fantastically recognised in New York with a kind of sporting parade that you think might have happened there a lot. But this one, I don't think it's ever been surpassed to recognise the achievement. And the American character was played by an English actress, Daisy Ridley, who was simply superb. I mean, there must be so many honours, individual honours you can have, I think, in movies, maybe not so much in football, but... and apparently she did all these, of course, wild water swimming takes with real gusto. Even when her lips were blue and she was shaking and shivering, she just went back for more because the director wanted more, and it really comes through in the film. It's a brilliant film, and with a sporting theme. I just wanted to share it with everybody. I'm sure plenty of you will have watched it, but it was very special.
Well, I'm going to throw in my best film of this year as well, which is by the world-class German director Wim Wenders. It's called Perfect Days, but I just want to go back to the beginning of his career in the early 1970s, because his first film was actually called The Goalkeeper's Fear of the Penalty, which was a wonderful film about a goalkeeper, but also about a murderer. And it was a cult film in the 70s, and it started this fantastic career that he's had. It was re-released a few years ago, and some marketing absolute... I mean, I'm not fond of marketing people in football, and some marketing person in film renamed it The Goalie's Anxiety at the Penalty Kick. I mean, the goalkeeper's fear of the penalty, the goalie's anxiety at the penalty kick. Hey, Duke, I've got a great idea how to rename this. Why have I put an American accent on for that?
At least it wasn't PK.
Yeah, true. So great film that, by the way, if you do get the chance to catch up with it. He's only been doing documentaries in recent years. Obviously, he's an elderly man now. And a Japanese friend of his said, you've got to come over to Tokyo. We've got the best public toilets, completely redesigned, fantastic public toilets. You've got to do something about them. So he went over and had a look and decided to go back into fictional filmmaking. And he did this fantastic film called Perfect Days about a guy who gets so much pleasure out of being the cleaner of the public toilets. And he's a strange kind of guy, but his life is just totally fulfilled by doing this. And it was really a film about fulfillment. Nothing really happens in it. He just cleans toilets, and they've got marvelous music. He's always got great soundtracks, and it's clean toilets, be happy.
Watch it at your convenience.
Hey, boom! Just to remind everybody again, as we finish, we are going to do a live recording of The Joy of Football at John Lewis in Oxford Street
in London.
Yeah, on Thursday, June the 27th, which is a day off for the Euros. It's after the group stage finishes and before the knockout starts. There's no football that day. It's at 6 p.m. and you can get tickets to it from Eventbrite, B-R-I-T-E. One word, is that? Eventbrite, one word. You'll find it on...
It's not a Wembley Stadium size venue, so if you want to go, I would act soon.
Yeah. And it's in a wine bar. Yes. John Lewis.
We'll try and keep you entertained, as we always have done. I hope you don't mind a little aside on the films. The film made a big impression on me, and I can't imagine going in the English Channel is something that we Brits have to be very careful about in our summer, which hasn't happened. But to swim it, even in modern times, it's just beyond belief. So catch the film.
Okay, that's it. From Martin and me.
See ya.
Ta-ra. And that's it. Just one thing on the post-pod. Martin and I are going on Substack, where you can read what we write. And we're going to start by posting Martin's letters from the Gantry. So that's going to go up now and in the next few days. If you want to actually read them, then, well, join us on, it's called The Joy of Football on Substack. What else can I tell you? I can tell you that the Patreon's there for anyone to look at it, that the tickets are there for the John Lewis gig, and I can tell you that you can follow us on social media, and we're on all the platforms. And are you still watching? Are you still listening? I've got nothing else to say.